Hi, and welcome to another course on workforce planning. This one is about implementation. It's session 5. I think that technically makes it the 6th session because we had a session 0 on wrapped redesign, and it's the final stage on wrapped redesign, notwithstanding the various sub courses and bits of learning that you can pick up. So hopefully by the time you finish this one, you've got a pretty good understanding of how to undertake a workforce redesign program. And also I guess it's a system redesign or a process redesign as well, because it's a fairly standard improvement approach. Wrapped redesign is a one of the 5 or 6 different courses that we have available around, which includes wrapped modelling, wrapped planning, etc., which we'll talk about at the end. Who are we? Well, my name is Colin Lurie. I run a management training and development company called Carados. We focus on providing free tools and techniques to build the skills of managers in workforce planning, cost control, customer service, and general management of frontline activities. And workforce planning is, let's face it, an absolute critical part of that. It's actually a critical part of all of that, as well as being an area in its own right. We work with Lancashire and South Cumbria NHS Foundation Trust and Health Education England also to provide and support the wrapped tool. It's developed by a group called the O1 Group, but the wrap tool itself is a free-to-use, online, secure workforce modelling tool. It provides a workforce repository to store your current state, and it includes a powerful but simple modelling tool to create multiple future state scenarios and share them safely between people. The wrapped tool, out of that came a few approaches, one of which is wrapped redesign, which we're going to talk about. The approach that we take is not to just provide free stuff, though. It's to also provide a structure around which you can provide the following. So if you're going to do this training, it's no good just looking at it. It'll probably be dull. You'll just think blankly a lot about this stuff. You can buy the book that accompanies this stuff. You can look at the wrap tool and everything else as much as you like. But unless you're using it on a real project, and unless you've got the time to devote to it, and unless the project is important enough to your organisation that they're not going to drag you off onto other things, then you're not going to get the most out of this program. So we're providing the tools and techniques, which is one of the cornerstones of the pyramid slash, I can't work out if it's a pyramid or a tetrahedron. Or you can, I'm able to look that up, but you need to be able to provide the other stuff around your capacity, a project to work on, and the support of your business. We say that every time because it's no good just coming to training courses or just listening to this stuff on its own. Having said that, I'm now going to run through what this is. So, workforce planning as a topic had 6 different things to look at. We looked at what workforce planning is and some of the barriers and all that sort of stuff. We are going to also look at wrapped as a tool, how to develop a workforce plan through wrapped plan, how to develop a workforce hub through wrapped hub, and how to develop your frontline workforce planning skills at a fairly high level. But this course is about workforce redesign, and we've already learned about the high-level process, how to set it up to succeed through the scope and mobilise phase, the current state, the future state. We had a brief look at modelling last week, and now we're going to look at planning and implementing the change, not quite so equally briefly, but it is interesting. Now, in terms of this course, we are going to use Kotter as a structure. So Kotter's guide to basically, I always say it's about leadership, but it's about system. It's about change and how to make change success. And we will be looking at that as part of the implement approach. It just gives us something to hang our hat on when it comes around implementation. We're going to talk about documenting the case and what that means, and we're going to talk about planning the actions to implement the change. We're going to talk about benefits realization, and we're going to talk about leadership and leading the change to make it a reality. Okay. This fits either at the end or the beginning or in the middle of the eternal circle of redesign. Scope and mobilisation, we talked about being first, current state, future state, modern and future state, and implementation. But as we also talked about a number of times, you can bounce between these as much as you as you like as part of the wrapped redesign approach. It is really lots of individual steps to think about, and with a bit of structure, if you like, that sort of thing, in terms of following a process round. But we are going to talk about implementation, documenting the case, planning the actions, planning the benefits realization, and leading the change. One of the two circles which has gloriously only 4 steps and is therefore looks okay in this format. This is the implement. It is right at the end of this course, from scope all the way through to implement. There are a number of X courses. There's X1 on data, which helps you to understand what data you're going to need and helps stopping that course from being too long. There is X2 on facilitating a workshop, which helps stop 3 be too long. There is X3 on process mapping, which is really about process mapping and workforce redesign, so I really ought to update that. X4 on the 7 R's of workforce planning, and X5 on wrap modelling, which Fiona and Amina from the wrapped team will be recording pretty soon, and they deliver that quite a lot. But we are looking at implement today, but make sure you look at all these different courses if you're going to get a really good understanding of wrapped redesign. So on to implementation. So as we said, 4 beautiful steps. You're going to document the case, which is going to set out the benefits and the costs of doing it. This links back to my point around making sure you have the right, it's a point I haven't made yet. This links to the point of making sure you've got investment to implement the change. Far too many redesigns do not properly get implemented, far too blooming many. And that's because we haven't really thought about implementation throughout it. So we do need to make sure we are documenting the case so that we can get the investment we need to implement these changes. It's about changing the whole plan and the comms plan and everything else, planning changes to implement change, and also then planning benefits realization processes to monitor and adjust to make sure the challenge is met. And then we'll also talk about leading the change to make it a reality. We could also talk about evaluation as a 5th step, which the team have had suggested we add to make sure that implementation's happened, which is a good challenge and one we'll talk about right at the end. So before we get into these individual steps, I just want to talk about Kotter. So this has come from www.kotterinc.com. Kotter is a great process. There was a book in 1995 called Leading Change. I'd recommend you get it. It sets out 8 steps for change. I think that may even have gone up now, but at the moment I think there's 8 steps for change. There is a website, as I say there. Please go on it. Please seek proper training in leading change as part of what you do. I just want to flag that this exists and to use his steps as a way through it. Now he's got 8 steps for it, and he says that if you don't do any of the, if you miss any of these things, change is likely to fail. Most changes do fail. Spoiler. I'm just going to see these as principles rather than confuse them with the steps, but just bear in mind that the Kotter approach sees these as steps. And please feel free to use that on its own if you wish, and just see what I'm talking about as some things to think about, or use the approach I'm talking about depending on how you want to go. We're all free and easy. As long as you're doing something, we're happy. So, documenting the case. So this sounds a bit dull, doesn't it? It's got to document the case. We've done the redesign. What on earth are we bothering to document the case for? Well, documenting the case is important, realistically, for these reasons. You need to communicate. You need to communicate the change to build the guiding coalition that Kotter talks about. So Kotter talks about making sure that you have a guiding coalition that's making sure this all works, and we need to make sure that we communicate the change to build that guiding coalition, to get people engaged with it. So we do need to set it out. We also need to secure the investment, and securing investment is actually very, very important, and we'll talk about it in wrapped plan around my basic way of putting it, which is we need more teeth. That is based on the film Jurassic World, where one of the characters is in a fight with on the same side as some nice dinosaurs versus some baddie dinosaurs. It gets complicated, don't worry. And one of the characters identifies that we need more teeth in order to win the fight. That does lead to somebody releasing a Tyrannosaurus Rex, which doesn't seem like a great idea, but in the context of the film it makes a huge amount of sense, and they win because they have more teeth. In this context, what you need is to make sure you have as much people and money focused on making it, on implementing it. And it's absolutely vital. So you do need to know what is the investment process, when and what do when is the investment going to get released and what do they need? Because if you're documenting the case, you might want to. I'm just checking actually, make sure I'm not talking about it. Yes, what you want to do is make sure you are understanding that maybe what they need is half a page now because they've got a couple of million quid left at the end of year which they need to spend. That might be better than spending months building a beautiful business case and there's no investment process for it to feed into. So you need to know what do people need? Is it competitive in order to get this money? But what is the investment process for actually making sure that people will put the money in to helping you do your implementation? Assuming this is not something that's in your own gift and you can just do it yourself, in which case don't worry about this. But most of the time you're going to need some investment. You need to know what the process is. You need to know who the key influencers and decision makers are. You need to know what they need, and you need to know, are there other options they have? Are there other things that they could be spending their money on that you need to make sure you are covering? So key thing for me here is understand that investment process, who they are, what they need, because we need to make sure that we are going to be able to document the case in the right way and meet their needs. So documenting the case is a key step, and we will talk a lot more about this in a second. The documenting the case, why should we engage? So what do we do? Why do we need to find out who the key influencers and decision makers are, and then engage those people? Well, there are a number of reasons why we should engage them. First of all, these people that we're going to engage, they are experts in their own right. Okay, so you've got people in the investment process who can help you to make sure you understand what makes a good business case. So they will have read hundreds of business cases and they'll say this stuff works and this stuff doesn't work. All right. So just talking to those individuals involved in the investment process will help you understand what you need to do. So they're experts in their own right. Secondly, you'll get their buy-in. If you engage them, if you go on and say, can you help me build a good business case? If the business case pitches up in front of them, they're more likely to green light it. Okay, and that's important. So, you know, even if they're not the world's greatest experts in these things, just getting involved in it will psychologically get them ready to help you with this and be more likely to be on your side. Thirdly, that you may need to help them pitch it. So you might be talking to people in the investment process. They might be involved in the investment process in that they're the ones that need to talk to other people about how this is important. You're not going to get to speak to those most important people. The problem you've got, if you hand a business case to someone and walk away, you've got no influence over it. You don't know how they're going to present it. You don't know whether they're going to say the right things, the wrong things, whether they're going to be bothered, whether they even present it or not. So by talking to them, you might get a chance to either coach them as to how to pitch it or a chance to help them pitch it themselves and actually see these people. Okay. And finally, one of the reasons why you may well need to engage people in the investment process is that sometimes an investment process can be quite complex, and you might need to educate and influence a number of decision makers and influencers over that decision. So decision makers are the people that actually make the decision, hence the name. Influencers are people that influence the decision, hence the name, but they don't actually make the decision themselves. You may need to build a communications plan for each of those to make sure that you are talking to each one and making sure you're getting the right investment. Now, I'm getting quite advanced here and really getting into it because there are a number of different processes. As I say, first of all, when you've done your future state, it might just make sense. You don't need any investment. You don't really need to worry too much about the implementation. It's very simple. You're just going to get on with it. Brilliant. Okay, get on with it. Yeah. GE, when I worked at GE, we used to call those just do it projects, and you just got on with them. Okay. Great, just get on with those projects. You don't need any investment. But if you're going to need some sort of investment for the implementation, for double running or whatever else, then you're probably going to need to at least get some money from somebody else. And so that's where you have the conversation. If you're doing a big change, you might really need to have a proper engagement plan, real sales push on this stuff, because it might be up against other things that people want to see happen. So you might think it's vital to re-engineer your MSK services, but cancer services are up the Swanee somewhere else, and somebody might be pushing for it. You might really want to engage MSK. You might want to change your MSK services, but it might be a massive change involving multi-organizational financial flow changes and proper proper engagement with patients and users and populations. You're going to need money for that, and you are going to have to get agreement to do it. So you may need to educate and influence decision makers, help using the sponsors you had at the start of the process. So all sorts of different ranges. Don't want to scare you too much, but that's why you might do it. What should a case include? The chap on the left-hand side is President Schwarzenegger in the Simpsons movie, I think it is, where he says, quite famously, I was elected to lead, not to read. And I have seen lots of people in the NHS like this. They just do not have an understanding of... they don't have an understanding, blimey. They don't have the time to be able to read complex, packed documents. So you've got to make sure that you are really focusing on the messages in this stuff, not on the document itself. That means you've got to have a couple of summaries in there. A really small summary. One of those summaries could just be a paragraph long elevator pitch or lift pitch. It doesn't sound quite as cool as it does in American. You need an elevator pitch so that you can say, okay guys, this is exactly what this is about and this is why you should invest in it. Okay, why we should be doing it. So named because it's something you could get over to somebody while you were travelling in a lift, which appears to be important for some reason. Secondly, a compelling vision. So you need to make sure that the second summary, is you might want a half or a one-page summary that can give you a bit more information than that elevator or lift pitch. But you need a couple of those summaries. Secondly, you need that compelling vision. It's one of the Kotter elements to make sure you've got a compelling vision. You really need to be able to get it across to people. You need to be able to do that in a simple way. As Einstein said, if you can't say something simply, you don't understand it. So you need to be able to get that across. But you really need a compelling vision as key part of what we do. So people can really get behind it and understand why we're doing it. You should include some options. A good business case would include some options to give people a degree of choices. Options should include a do-nothing view. You have to realise that whatever you put in front of people, even what you think is perfect, may not be perfect given the political environments that you're working within. So any business case should have a number of options, including a do-nothing, which would say this is what will happen if you don't make a decision. Fire and brimstone, everything going wrong, cats and dogs living together, etc. But assuming that they do something, a couple of options that they can go for. There's a whole trick to doing options so that you get people to choose the right one. But certainly a preferred option should be there, and other options should be available. You need clear benefits and costs for each options. That is vital, so people can really see those and they need to be real. But you can put qualitative and quantitative ones in there, but quantitative ones win out a lot of the time. And at the bottom, engage patients, team members and clinicians. Managers are used to managers talking to them. They're used to trying to bat managers away and to challenge manager behaviour. It seems to be inbred for managers to challenge managers. You bring a patient along to a session where if you've got a patient voice in your document, you bring a patient along to a presentation, and suddenly the dynamic changes considerably. Bring your team members along. Bring some of your younger team members along so they can see what happened. Bring your passionate clinicians along. Whatever you need to bring along, it is absolutely well worth making sure that you engage the rest of your team. Don't go alone. Bring friends that can change the dynamic considerably. So, there's some high-level stuff around documenting a case, and I could stop there in terms of, look, if you're going to document a case, jumping back, I would say, look, understand the investment process, where's the money, when is it going to be available, what do they need for it? Engage people in that process to building their expertise, to gain their buy-in, to help them pitch it, and to educate them. And consider the summaries, a compelling vision, some key options, clear benefits and costs for each option, and engaging patients. If you had a single page that did those things, presented well by a patient or a team member and clinicians or whatever else, then wow, you've probably made your case in most cases. But if you really want to get into the detail of business cases, then you can look at these here. There's a 3-phase or 4-phase model. I'm sure it's an HM Treasury one. I couldn't find it on the internet the other day, so I could be entirely making that up. But certainly the 3 or 4-phase model above is a good way of thinking about things, and also there is a 5 case model for thinking about business cases. If you're getting much beyond concept paper, it's often worth bringing in help, or at least sitting down with a cold compress on your head and looking at the internet and thinking, let's learn about these in a lot more detail. But basically what you've got for the 3-phase model, or 4-phase model as it's sometimes called because it's got 4 phases. First thing is a concept paper. There's quite often a process you have to go through for investment. Certainly in trusts there might be a business or a commercial process you have to go through. Sending them a commercial paper early on that says, look, this is the high level view of the change, the issues, and the expected benefits is a good start. Helps build up engagement. Then you can move to the strategic outline cases where you set out the strategic fit with what they're trying to do, but again it's fairly high level. Then you can move to an outline business case where you build in a detailed appraisal of options, highlighting a best value for money option, prepare different procurement options, set out the procurement options that you need to face, confirm where the funding will come from, and its affordability, and then you move to a full business case, which is normally where it gets even more complex, which includes the delivery plan and contractual arrangements, normally after it's gone. These are all supposed to be done on a sort of a gateway process. You send the concept paper in and people go, yep, that makes sense, go to strategic outline case, or no, or more likely go and do a bit more work on it and come back to this group. Then you do the strategic outline case where you check its view against the strategy. Then you move to the outline business case where you, as I say, provide these more detail, and then finally the full business case. Not often go through all 4 of those, but in a big process you might have to. There are 5 different cases set out by the 5-case model. So these are different areas that you might want to consider when you build a business case. One is the strategic, which we've already talked about. What's the strategic fit and the clear case for change? The economic, so financially, what good does it do? Commercial, who's going to deliver this in terms of doing the work if we're going to get third parties to do it, and therefore how are we going to get the best commercial deal from those? So typically if a project involved bringing in a staff rostering system, for example, we'd need to think about what are the commercial options and how we're going to get the best deal from those. So that's why it's different to economic. The financial one is again different to economic because it's about where will we secure the funding from, and how can we influence how much funding we do get, and also influencing how do we maintain and balance and control the economic costs to make sure that they don't get out of line. And finally, the management is how we will deliver the project, so that will include the plan and everything else. So if you're really getting into business cases, there's loads of stuff on the internet about them, more on this stuff here. There's a massive guide as to how to use 5 cases, etc. And as I say, there are many experts in doing SOC, OBCs, or SOCs, OBCs and FBCs as well, and you might not get into that level. So basically, engage, write the case, go back, engage, write the case. That's what documenting the case is about. You need to form a strategic vision, looking back to Kotter. This allows you to build a guiding coalition of important people to engage in the process. We need to create a sense of urgency in this stuff, which is why it's important to sort of set out what will happen if we don't do things. And there's also a chance here to enlist a volunteer army through this process, through communicating with people and getting people engaged in this process. We can help people to enlist a volunteer army to deliver this work. So worth checking against Kotter as we go through, and making sure that we are doing all the things we need to do to make sure we're delivering on our change. So that was the key things around business planning. Now, what about planning actions? Step 2. You'll see the multiple use of exclamation marks there, which is not a great sign. But this, just pointing out that this is not linear. So you'll need to do this to inform the business case. Your planning actions will form part of your business case as well. So just making that point with 6 exclamation marks at the beginning and end. When it comes to the planning actions, you're going to need 3 things. You're going to need new governance. All right. So you had a governance process for your project. That now needs to change. Okay. Even if it's just to say it's going to stay the same, we need to have a good look at the new governance. It's almost certainly going to change. We're almost certainly going to need a new plan, unless you've got some next level planning skills when you did the original work, and you did the redesign, and you could think ahead as to what the solution was going to be. You are going to need a new plan for implementation, which is very different from what you had for redesign, and you're going to need a new engagement and a new comms plan. Okay, we talked about all of these right at the start. This shouldn't be new to you, but you are going to need new versions of these things. So let's look at each one of them. From a new governance and plan point of view, you are going to need a new steering group, probably a new chair and deputy, potentially. You're going to need new administration support for these things because your current team might not be carrying on with it. You're going to need a new agenda for that steering group. You're going to need new objectives for the group. So you're going to need a whole new set of terms of reference. Why is that important? Well, we need that guiding coalition for change, and we need to remove obstacles. So that steering group is going to be important for the implementation. You're going to need a project manager, and you're going to need a team, and that's probably going to be different. So you're probably going to need new resources. You may get a third party to deliver some of this stuff for you. You might need to hire a new project manager or find a new project manager that's different from the person leading the redesign, because it's a different set of skills. You might need new advisors and a new delivery team. Okay, so that's going to be important. You're going to need to think about different monitoring processes for monitoring progress and success. So you might have just been monitoring it based on percentage through the program. Now you're going to have to say, are we delivering against the benefits? Are we delivering against the milestones, which we've already been doing, but for a different set of milestones, and any other indicators that we need to be monitoring. And we also need a new plan. Okay, so we talked about that. It's a plan for delivery, not design. Key things to think about. What can we do to generate short-term wins in this? As I say, it's no good saying, well, it's going to take a year to develop. Part of what Kotter says is to make sure if you can generate short-term wins, you can build a kind of reputation for success, and that will help people generate stuff. You need to institute change, and you need to sustain the acceleration. You need to make sure you're constantly making sure that once you've started the change, you are sustaining it. So these are key elements to it. So you need new governance, and you need plan, and you need a new engagement and comms plan. Now, where I used to work at Finnemore, there were three things we looked at when it came to change. One was, when it came to a model for change for individuals. People are interested in three things. They're interested in why change. What is the reason for it? What does it make sense on a basic level? Okay, to actually do the change. But secondly, what is in it for me? What am I going to get out of this change? Yeah. So you might say, oh, MSK services are going to improve for patients. They're going to be 50% cheaper. Right, brilliant. No. That's no good for me if I'm going to have to work twice as blooming hard to deliver that necessarily. So I need to know what's in it for me. Yeah. Are my patients going to be better off? Am I going to be better off? Yeah. What's in it specifically for me? Am I going to have to? How am I going to gain from this? Finally, how am I going to cope with this change, right? Because the change is going to make change happen. I might have to drive further. I might have to work differently. And people want to know how are they going to cope with that change, because this can be real for people. Yeah, just being put in the same room as others when you're doing something as simple as building a booking centre. Simple, blimey, it's one of the hardest things I've ever done. If you're doing that, yeah, people will think, how am I going to cope with being sat next to so and all that sort of stuff. So it is how will I cope is absolutely critical. So these are things you need to think about. You also need to think about, and a key part of how you cope is proper communication for a start. We do need to think about building that new engagement, that new comms plan. So that means you need to know, who are the stakeholders again? What do we want to communicate them with? How often do we want to communicate with them on it? Go back to the scope and mobilise stage if you need more information on that. But just be clear that when it comes to engagement and communications, you are going to have quite a range of people. Most people, there's a model in the middle. I don't know who this model is. I really need to find a reference for it. Most people in the middle will be indifferent to change. You will have some opponents at the far end. You'll have some advocates who really want this to happen at the other end. And you have this big bell curve, as I say, where most people are indifferent. Some people will be following the advocates, others will be blockers, but they're not actual opponents. Opponents are going to lose from it. You are probably never going to convince them. They are going to lose, or they're just against it, and it's not worth trying to convince them. You still need to keep them up to date. You still need to respect them, but sometimes you're not going to convince them. You need to bring the silent majority on board. You need to engage with them to bring them on board so they don't start moving towards the blocker and opponent side and they're more followers and advocates. It can be worth working on blockers, because nothing is better than somebody who has been transitioned to your cause, as it were, and is suddenly a believer when they were they were actively blocking it before. But key thing is to make sure you engage the silent majority to bring them on board with the change. When you're writing a comms plan, an engagement plan, and thinking about people as advocates, followers, blockers, and opponents, don't write down this thinking. This is a mental model for thinking about which groups do we deal with. It is not a tool for assigning labels to people, and do not write this stuff down on a whiteboard and then forget to write it off, because there's nothing worse for a project than somebody being identified as a blocker on a wall when they don't see themselves as a blocker, for example. You're dealing with real people here. Treat it with respect. It's a mental model for thinking about who do I need to convince, who do I need to spend time bringing on side, who do I just need to update, etc. Go back to mobilisation if you need more on that. So you've got a new plan, you've got a new engagement plan, you've got a business case, you've got new governance in place, you've now got a plan for your benefits realisations. Kotter again talks about building on the change and anchoring it in the organisation, and there is a great way of doing this through planning your benefits realisation. So if you're going to do this, you need to understand the organisation's strategy first and foremost, which can be pretty fluid. But if you're going to do benefits realisation, we need to know how is it going to help the organisation's strategy. And you need to know how this program is going to assist that strategy. You need to work out how much of the strategy the program is going to address, so which bits of it, and how much of that bit it's going to do. All right. So if, for example, your project is going to solve 100% of the strategy of the business, of your trust or of your system, then you are very much in the money in terms of investment, because people will go, great, I'll just invest in this project, it'll all be solved, moving on. If you are solving 50% of one part of a 10-part strategy, well then you are you may be helpful, you might not. You're one part in a large wheel, but it could be useful. If you're solving 1% of 1 out of 100 priorities, then you're going to be competing with quite a lot of people for funding. So identifying how much this program will assist the strategy, highlighting exactly how much the strategy the program will address, preferably quantitatively, but you can also do it qualitatively as well, especially if you are bringing in views from patients and from staff, etc. You need to break down the expected benefits and put them into a benefits realisation plan. So you break them down like this. You have a description, which is a description of the benefit. You have the value, which is what is this value going to be, preferably quantitatively, possibly qualitatively. You need a timescale. When are you expecting that benefit to be realised, or bits of that benefit to be realised? Right, that's all fairly simple. You also need a benefits owner. Who is responsible for delivering those benefits so that you can engage them in the conversation? You need a group who's going to benefit from it. And who is going to sign off from it at the end? So it's a person or group. Who is the person who's going to say, yep, that benefit's happened? All right, important. And then you need a plan. It should be linked to the overall plan, but what are the detailed steps or the milestones for delivery and monitoring of the benefit itself? What is going to deliver that cost saving? What's going to deliver that staff morale improvement? What's going to deliver that outcome improvement? Okay, you need to have what is going to do those things. What are the steps that if you don't take, they ain't going to happen? All right, and that's what you need to do. Okay, benefits realisation is really fun stuff in terms of making sure that you have everything that you need. It's not heavy. It's good stuff. Okay. We in the RAPT team were funded by Health Education England for a very long time, and we had to prove the impact of everything we did. So planning benefits realisation was absolutely critical. Okay. Cool. So we've done those. The final thing is leading the change. Now, so Kotter is a change methodology. I am slightly misrepresenting it here, but I believe in its elements so much and use it as a touchstone to go back to. Leading the change, I mean, leadership is the most undefined, but also most undefined thing that you find in implementation, but it is absolutely critical. If there's one thing which will improve or cause a project to fail, it is good or poor leadership. it is absolutely vital. A few things to think about here is that you need to create a sense of urgency and get this done quickly. If we take time, it will disappear. So we need to create a sense of urgency to get everybody on board. And you're only going to get everybody on board if you can really get everybody thinking, yes, this is something that needs solving and it needs solving now. So create a sense of urgency. Form a guiding coalition. As I say, workforce planning is impossible, as we learnt. It says here at the start, this unnecessarily long book, which is not true. This unnecessarily long course. You can tell where I cut this from. We need to make sure that we are creating a sense of urgency, but we need to make sure we have a guiding coalition to drive this forward, possibly to the detriment of their own organisation's financial position. So you need to make sure you've got serious people engaged in making this happen. You need a vision for change. Communication plans are all very well, but communication's a fluid human thing. You need to be on top of that. You as a leader need to be creating that vision for change, communicating that vision for change, and communicating all the time. And you need to make sure that you are removing obstacles to this, to delivery, and making sure you're keeping those busy teams on track and you are continuing to lead the change throughout. So they were it. 4 steps for implementation. As I say, we could add evaluation to that as a 5th step. We are looking at that. Evaluation would mean, certainly in projects I'm involved with, working in with other systems, I am implementing a situation where you have a review to make sure that there is an implementation plan at the end of the implementation phase, to make sure it's in place, and then a couple of reviews 6 months in and a year later to see where we're up to in terms of delivering the change and whether the change has had the impact it should do. We'll also talk metrics in the hub, where we'll be looking at what metrics you should be looking at to make sure that your change isn't causing issues elsewhere. But that is for another day. I hope you found that useful from an implementation point of view. The final step in RAP Redesign, as far as this particular course is concerned. We have been through lots of different stages, from understanding what the whole thing is, through scope and redesign. We've covered the current state, the future state. We've covered modelling, and we've covered implementation in this section. It's a workforce redesign approach. It takes into account the need to change process, equipment, estates, your digital tools, and your organisational structures to support workforce change. Okay, we've covered a lot, but we've only touched on some of the skills, especially those around process mapping, role redesign, change management, project management, facilitation, communications, business case development, time management, leadership. We've looked at elements of those, but we've by no means exhausted them. So your journey does not end here in terms of understanding where we need to go next, because you can spend a lot of time developing each of those individual skills, both in real life, but then also in looking on the internet or through various different training courses. There is a huge amount of stuff out there. It's a non-linear process that you've worked through at this point. If you've managed to get through the whole thing, then well done. The next step now is really to implement it and to use it, or to continue your learning, which could be around registering to the RAP tool, buying the bumper book of healthcare workforce planning, which includes a lot of this stuff in it, but in book form, and with hugely hysterical jokes throughout. Actually, not many of those. Visit the RAPT website, visit the Health Education England website, visit the Carados website there for more information. You can also email me through the Carados website. Also, consider starting the RAPT Plan course, a very short course, the RAPT Hub course, a very short course, or the RAPT Frontline course. Nothing like as much work as the RAPT Redesign course. Most of those can be done in a single, albeit long, session. So that is it on RAPT Implement and RAPT Redesign. Thank you all for taking part in learning this stuff. Hope to see you soon. Cheers, bye.